Our next speaker is Jean-Francois Arsenault. Jean-Francois is the Managing Partner, Operation and Finance at CPCS. CPCS has been in our environment for 50 years. They were founding members of the Corporate Council on Africa. I mean, they are close to our heart. They are part of what we do. Jean-Francois is an economist by training, has a strong executive experience in Africa, Asia, North America, with emphasis on Ppps, project and infrastructure. He's acquired his experience over 100 mandates for both public and private clients, cover mainly transportation, mining, and the energy sector. So these are topics of the day. As managing partner for finance and operation, he oversees the proper execution of all CPCS mandates and ensures the financial stewardship of the firm. Prior to his current position, Jean-Francois initiated and developed the Francophone Africa division for CPCS, which is something as well that we're close to. He also has experience working with the Africa Development Bank, the Canadian International Development Agency, the Bank of Canada, and the Center for Studies of Living Standards. So Jean-Francois, I turn this over to you to add to our discussion that we're currently having. Jean-Francois.
Thank you, Benoit. Thank you to the previous speakers. As an economist, I really appreciate these interventions, which were very, very relevant. I think they gave us a very good picture of the future of Africa, which we believe is also very bright. My intervention today is going to be a lot more focused on how COVID has impacted our operations initially, how we reacted, and then how we see the future, of operations. So what's new, what's different, what's going to be accelerating, and what's the impact on the way we will do business in Africa as a Canadian firm. So CPCS is a global management consulting company with deep roots in Africa. We have 8 offices in Africa. We have 120 employees. We're focused on, as Benoit said, on transportation and on power in terms of sector. We work a lot in the mining sector through our infrastructure nexus. A lot of heavy mining company mines require railways, etc. So we work in there a fair bit, and our focus is really on strategy, transaction advisory, and project development. So we work as a captive developer with Africa to develop a number of projects throughout the continent in terms of logistics and power. So that really puts us in the middle of the African growth story. The future of CPCS, we share the future of Africa. So the success of Africa is our success, and we are very optimistic. So I think that gives you an idea of where we come from. For us, business is people. So when we look at the crisis and where we come from and what's the impact, the first thing we thought about, okay, what's the impact on people? What's the impact on us? What's the impact on our clients? And then, of course, we think, what's the impact on business? But one flows from the other. So I don't know if my presentation is being shared. I don't see it on the screen, but or should I? Okay, I'm the one controlling it. Perfect. So yeah, so maybe I'll share that too. So what's the impact on people for us in the short term? How did we live it? There was a lot of practical concern in the short term. How do we arrange remote work? How do we get people safe? How do we get more information on what's happening to inform our decision process? How do people get more information? So there was a lot of concern. We work we have people in 20 different geographies. They're all wondering. In the medium term, practical concerns. I think everyone's living it, working with kids, impact on productivity, mental well-being. How do we accomplish what we need to accomplish? Because projects don't stop. Nothing is formally stopped in all of our operations. We have about 100 projects ongoing. I think 2 have stopped. The other one maybe has slowed down a little bit, but everything is still ongoing. How do we deal with the IT and emotional state that everyone has, and how do we deal with the real tragedies that we had everywhere in our network? I mean, let's be real here. We have one of our associates, who's been working with CPCS for 10 to 15 years in Tanzania. Ex director of the railway. passed away from COVID. Those are real tragedies. It's a real impact. We can't ignore that. And that goes into the long term. What's the impact on our people? What's the impact on our clients? But what's the impact on employees? How do they share the value the company displayed during the crisis? I think Dr. Kojo mentioned companies will live with the consequences of this crisis for a long time and how they decided to deal with this crisis. And that's as true as how they deal with the community around them, how they deal with their employees. And for us, it was a very real concern from day one. Will people want to work with us and for us in the future? And that brings us to the impact on business. We are a global company. And one thing that I found fascinating managing a global company at this moment is that the timing of the impact was clearly differentiated by geography. So we have a number of our staff in Canada, we have a number of our staff in the US, we have a large number of our staff in Africa. And I would say Canada was probably the first place that reacted and had after Europe, of course, had a sense. And we as management, we all wanted to react. But people in Africa say, like, nothing's happening here. Like, there's no concerns yet. Same thing in the US. So there was a real trade-off between decision-making, swift decision-making and consensus building. And I think it goes to the core and the strength of a company that works in a large number of geographies and a large variety of geographies where, we need to consider the local realities. And so we decided to focus on practical concerns. In terms of the medium term, I think, clearly clear reduction in the velocity of work. There's fundamental uncertainty about the timing. And while we don't have any concern for the survival of the business, I mean, we're a very resilient business. And I'll be frank, one of the reasons we're a resilient business is because we work in Africa. Africa is resilient because the environment is particular. It has challenges, and that makes for resilient people, resilient businesses. I think we're seeing it in terms of African businesses and businesses like ours that work in Africa. We're very diversified, and we're well anchored in our markets. So that allows us to not be concerned about the sustainability of the business, but really to unleash our differentiators. So creativity, the closeness to our clients and their realities, and the shared vision. So I won't spend more time on that, but I think it's good to set the tone. Why does this matter, and why will that have an impact in the future? It all stems from there. So quickly, I'll just share that because I think it's important also to understand, how do we take care of our people? So for us, we were all working remotely in one day, so we were clearly ready for this. We repatriated some people. We put some safety measures in place for people that remain locally. We continue to have an impact on the ground. Our offices remain fully staffed. Some people can go to the office for short periods of time in some countries, but in reality, nothing has fundamentally changed. I think what's really changed is the level of communication we have, and both internally and externally. So we reach out to all our clients very quickly, individually, to try to find solutions. And internally, we instituted a weekly town hall with above more than 100 of our employees joining every week. And we try to reassure people with very clear vision of the future for them. At the end of the day, in the middle of a crisis, people want to know how it's going to impact them. And we really didn't minimize the emotional side. I think, both with clients and with employees, these moments become emotional, and decision making can be affected, and the way you perceive the world, it can be affected. So, one thing we've done is we really dialed up the emotional content. I think people want to feel connected. I think this is one of our strengths normally, to feel connected to across our global network of employees, of clients. But we really dialed it up. We had some small competition. We had a nursery rhyme competition where people made fun of me. I think I have one here. Roses are red. Our logo is blue. Our name is short, and JF is 2. I'm not the tallest guy in the company, as you can imagine. So that's what we did. Now let me focus on what I think is people are most interested in terms of this webinar. So what did we do in terms of operations to keep business going? Okay, what did we focus on? So I'll show you a little bit of the solutions we put in place with our clients, to some of the problems we had. And then I'll segue into what we see the impacts of COVID could be, and what we see the changes that we see from COVID, and what would be the impact on businesses, not just our businesses, but other businesses that operate in Africa. So of course we leverage the additional time we had. We really intensify our top leadership content. You know, I mentioned some of it there, but we have a few content on how we see aviation kicking back in the next few years, and how it could be done. We have a piece on African railways and African railways financing. So a lot of the things we work on for a long time. It allows us to share that knowledge. We've done we've done some pro bono work related to COVID impacts on Ppps. As you can imagine, a lot of these deals that have been made, that's a risk that was not fully baked into contracts. So that there's a lot of review of contracts, you know, review of ongoing deals, and how they're going to be impacted. So we're doing some pro bono work for a few clients across the continent on this. But in terms of how do we keep operations going, and what are the elements we look at? So of course, one of the big shifts we've seen is a lot more openness from people we work with to new ways of doing things. And our strength is to really be anchored in the markets we are in. So you'll see that some of the solutions here really depend on your ability to be embedded in the market. So the first one is we had a virtual workshop, or we had a workshop we needed to do, but the client, you know, rightly indicated that they didn't want the participants to pay to call in, etc., and they don't all have access to the proper technology. So this was in Ghana, and we have an office in Ghana. We have people in Ghana. So we talked to the telecom companies that run a free toll-free lines for churches across Ghana to run services. And so we leveraged their infrastructure that they put in place for the spiritual community to run our workshop, and participants will call for free. I think this is a good example of how to leverage, you know, local knowledge and how things are done locally to run international business. Another one, you know, which we will be running soon is a virtual evaluation of a proposal for a long-term concession. So these kind of things are very sensitive. There's a lot of security issues and information management issues that are going into that. So I think it's going to be one of the first time anyone does one of those long-term concession assessment virtually. So we are all quite intrigued as to how this will go. But I think the openness of doing this way really stems from COVID. No one would have been comfortable doing this unless this was the case. And the last one is really technology focus. You know, we do a lot of transportation work, and it's really critical to assess the viability of deals, and traffic assessments are key. And so we have a project in Lagos right now where a traffic survey is required. But let's be frank, no one can be sure that traffic patterns during the crisis are reflective of what will be, you know, the reality for a long-term infrastructure. So we're designing a way to do a traffic survey, but benchmark it to satellite imagery before and after the crisis to really benchmark whether the traffic we are capturing for the deal is appropriate. So it's quite out of the box. It relies on a local team that gathers the primary data, but also on an international team that brings value added there. So this is how we're dealing with the crisis, really. But what does it mean? How do we see the crisis changing the way business is done? I think fundamentally, our fundamental view is that it's not going to change the way business is done, because business remains, and as that's true everywhere in the world, business remains about people and relationships. That's the key. When you invest in a deal, you're investing in the people that carry that deal. Of course, the fundamental will matter, but the people matter at least as much. So that fundamental will not change. Now, the way of building trust, the way of assessing risk will change. And so I'll go quickly through our view of some of these things will change. At least in the medium term, we see that traveling will get more complicated, restricted, expensive, or the perception of risk related to travel will increase. People may want to travel less. I think that's a reality. And that one thing that will turn into is that the importance of proximity will increase. I think it really goes to the supply chain question too. If mobility is reduced, proximity is more important. We see it in our operation. I mean, in the medium term, we definitely see regional travel open up well before international travel is fully open and functional, for example. So we see, we firmly believe that the ECOWAS region in Africa will open up to travel within the region well before traveling from Canada becomes fully open with no quarantine and no restriction. So we will, we have an Africa program where we'll send a number of our people that are not located in our office today to our offices to be able to keep running. But that's the short-term impact. The long-term impact is that we're really ramping up the sizes of our office, the strength of our office through expansion and acquisition locally. And we really think that will remain a big differentiator and a necessary part of doing business in Africa and anywhere, of course. In terms of the technology, now during the crisis, I think a lot of the stakeholders with whom we interact have increased their comfort in the use of new technology. And we think that will be a sustained change. I mean, when we look at Africa, adoption of technology, especially like it's never really been the issue. The infrastructure was more the issue, and it remains the issue today when we do these things. But I think now with the crisis, in terms of going to a new and more resilient economy in Africa, infrastructure, ICT infrastructure will see massive investment, we believe, because it's necessary for Africa to continue to grow. They have the talent to leverage that infrastructure, and now we have the proof that there's a willingness and an openness to leverage it to a full extent. So I mean, as Zemedeneh mentioned initially, I think Africa is already ahead of many more developed economies in terms of adoption of those new services. Banking, most notably, but we see that going and increasing, accelerating. Now, what does it mean for our business? We really think that it's going to improve the efficiency of process, what I would call processes, the discussion, contract negotiation, more frequent check-ins. It's going to increase the trust that's already been built because there's going to be a way to interact on a more frequent basis. But it won't replace the core activities, the initial relationship building, developing sustainable trust. It's just going to make it easier for people who have that infrastructure, that trust infrastructure, that social infrastructure that they have with the people on the ground. They're going to be able to leverage it more strongly with technology. I think when we look in terms of deals and how deals are going to get done, I think it will accelerate the building of trust between international investors and local investors, because there's going to be this level of comfort to have those additional interactions, check-ins on a continual basis. And that really goes to the question of risk. Now, when we talk about Canada and Africa, I think risk or the perception of risk, I think, is really at the core of the issues Canadian investors have with Africa. We've a number of times engaged with institutional investors from Canada to try to bring them into deals in Africa, because we both develop projects where the English are involved, Europeans are involved, local investors are involved. We're trying to bring the Canadians in those deals, and there's a perception of risk or a lack of knowledge about Africa that really affects the way they perceive it. So how will this crisis affect how Canadian company, and I'm going to focus on Canadian company, assess risk? Now, I think, initially, in the short term, Canadian firms will go to what they feel is less risky, and it's not going to be, because the crisis is going to reduce their risk appetite in the short term. That's our view. So there's not going to be a run for investment in places like Africa. But I think as things unfold, that perception will change, because we see Africa as being a very resilient place to do business in the context of pandemics. For example, it's diversified. There's different there's different types of economy, and there's a high level of growth. So the rebound is going to be very high. And as these economies, if we look at the resiliency of African economies, especially given their limited fiscal capacity, it's amazing. We look at the IMF projection, and if we exclude the countries that are suffering from the oil shock at the same time, which I think is a particular situation, the rebound is much stronger in most African countries than it is in developed economies, and that's despite all the money printing that's been going on and all the investment by government. So the internal resiliency of these economies is going to be seen, and I think that will affect the way people assess the risk of advancement positively. We also see an increases in the speed of IT telecom investment. And as I mentioned before, I think the addition of technology will allow Canadian firms, Canadian investors to gain a higher level of confidence because they will be interacting with their African counterparts on a more frequent basis, and it will change the way they perceive these countries pretty quickly. We believe. So we see in the medium term, in 3 to 5 years, we feel like Canadian firms are going to get a lot more comfortable with Africa compared to where they are most of them right now. Of course, when you talk about mining companies, they've been comfortable to do business anywhere in the world. I mean, that's the nature of mining companies. They take risk and they go where their resources are. But we think in terms of other investments, we're going to see a boom in the level of confidence of Canadian institutional investors to do business in Africa. In terms of demand, in terms of funding from international financial institutions, I think in the short term, for us, it's clear that there's going to be a shifting of that funding. I mean, we've already seen in some projects where institutional investors are shifting money away from infrastructure projects, or infrastructure project development at this point, to crisis management and related matters. So what did they focus it on? They focused on health, local production, on resiliency project. Now, will that be a sustained impact? We don't think so. There's some shift in the short term, but I think as it is in developed economy, as governments want to spur investment, they will focus on the big ticket item, and that still is today infrastructure. So there's no clear picture of the future yet, but we do believe the investment in infrastructure will at least continue at the level it was going before. Now, one of the things that's really changed, and we think it's going to continue to spur investment in infrastructure, is that there's a number of transportation services or power companies or state-owned enterprises in Africa that are facing real issues right now. COVID has just made some of the weaknesses even more obvious. Some of them are going bankrupt. Some of them just don't have any funding, and the governments don't have the capacity, the fiscal capacity to sustain those state-owned enterprises for much longer. So the reform process, which was already really well started before the crisis, I think will accelerate. And those reform processes tend to open sectors to the private sector into additional investment, and we think that's going to accelerate investment in Africa also in the coming years in terms of what demand and infrastructure sector we expect to see. And then the last thing we think about, of course, is supply. We have a set of services, and there's going to be a lot of money around and a lot of available investment money. So what's going to happen? With opportunities arguably lessening in the short term, at least in our spheres. So the competitive landscape will change. Especially if the market proves resilient. We see more people coming in the market, but on the other side, we see less people focus on cross-border business. So a lot of businesses that do operate there will focus more regionally. So the way we see it is really in line with our proximity approach. Is there's going to be the importance of the local capacity of the local investors is going to become more important. They're going to play a bigger role, and that's the way to really get in those markets and get a strong anchor. So it's gonna get more competitive, but the nature will shift. You won't be able to just come in and come out, fly in, fly out, or do that kind of business. You'll have to be anchored in the regional or local market to really do business, because of that fear of cross-border business and that a lot of the bigger players will have. So that's basically what we feel is new from due to COVID and how it will affect business in the future for us and for Canadian investors. So yes, that's my presentation.